I wanted some kind of special activity that would enable me to be in a place where I was working both with big ideas and with realities in the world. My natural tendency is towards the deepest content and substance of what it means to be Jewish or to be Israeli, but I really only found a home when you and when Seymour and Amort offered me the chance to be part of all the Mandel operations. It was really a place where I felt here is a growing institution project that's trying to survive in the realities, to work with the realities, to thrive in the realities, with deep content and substance and ideas about being Jewish, about being Israeli, and about being human, and at the same time for it to be infused by the best learning that academic research can give. And I was being asked to shake it up, to make all these three work together. And so the more I stayed with Mandel institutions, the more I felt that I was actually living up to what I was looking for all those years. In my path, in my searching for that kind of professional home for myself, it was clear once I met Seymour that he knew exactly where I was going, and that his conception of what it meant to be involved in education was exactly what I was looking for. But when I met Seymour, it was like being invited into the noblest of all professions, the most complicated and the most sophisticated, because Seymour saw education not as an area of expertise that has a clear path in it, the way many other professions had. Seymour presented education to us as a kind of arena that collapsed into that arena are inputs from many disciplines, from the world of philosophy, from the world of psychology, from the world of the social sciences that study realities, that if any one of these areas took over the whole picture of what you thought education was about. If you thought education was only about psychological growth and development, you'd miss out so many of the other things that contribute to what creates an educational reality and to what creates an educational success. Here was Seymour coming along with a lot of youthful, idealist people who were dissatisfied with the Jewish and Israeli condition and who thought they had the answers. And you put your answers on the table and he would bring a baseball bat and show you how vulnerable your greatest ideas were if you didn't take into account the other factors, the other disciplines that had something to say about the realities. Mandel Initiative, there were three prongs that were necessary to change the world. The first prong was clear: you needed people. That was, everyone agreed that without investment in people, you couldn't make large-scale change. And out of all those commitments, I don't have to go over them, everyone had their own take on why people, came the Mandel Leadership Institute. The second one was community support. If you didn't have, you could have the greatest people, but if they went out there ahead of the community, they didn't work hand in hand in a trusting relationship with the community, no one would give them the support and the resources to be able to succeed. But, and here came Seymour's invitation, even where you have good people and you have community support, said Seymour, you could still fail in Jewish education, in Israeli education, in education altogether, if you didn't have depth and dynamism in the very ideas that govern your practice as an educator. If your idea of what made being Jewish meaningful was still borrowing from the spiritual capital of Eastern European Jewry, from the memories and the romance of that period, if they were irrelevant in tackling on some of the deepest challenges that come out of the question, why be Jewish at all? What's wrong with just being a good American or Israeli citizen? If those ideas were not translated into meaningful interactions with 3-year-olds, with adults, in different kinds of settings. Not to ideology that you pronounce, to be Jewish is X, but if you don't activate those ideas in the relationships that learners and educators have, then you're going to fail. And you're going to bring the community with you to fail, and even worse, you might even, and this was Seymour's warning, if the ideas that govern our practice in education are tepid, if they're parve, we might actually become the link in the chain that convinces the learner why not to be Jewish, why not to give their lives to Israel. Because they say, if that's what it's all about, I got other places that are better for me to go. The Educated Jew Project was a intense, systematic, and long-term effort to develop new educational ideas for the practice of Jewish and Israeli education. All of the scholars that we worked with had the same kind of biography. They had an area of expertise in their scholarly work, yet they were willing to take their ideas about what they learned about the Jewish condition and posit them outside of the academic world to the larger Jewish or Israeli public and say, here is where I believe our community should go to. And with each of these scholars, to get them to the point where they were re-articulating their deepest ideas as this whole continuum that leads between ideas and practice. That involved a lot of personal and intimate work with them, which is the heart of what I did with each of these people in their apartments, in their offices, in my office, in the car on the between meetings, in memos that were written back and forth as a kind of intellectual editor of the work. It was also in meetings that we created between these scholars and themselves, where the atmosphere was, you can't cheat. You have to be honest and critique the other ones, but it has to be done in the spirit of ennoblement. And the debates that were there were not, they were polite, but they were substantive. There was no fudging it there. But it really did help the responses of each of these authors, each of these authors of visions of Jewish education to each other, help them re-articulate their ideas, and over a period of 10 years their ideas moved from original articulations to large-scale visions of Jewish education. This project resulted in a volume entitled Visions of Jewish Education that was published by Cambridge University Press in 2003, edited by Seymour Fox, Israel Scheffler, and I. I think in North America now, anyone who comes seriously into the field of Jewish education will study that book at some place in their professional training now. It's reached that level. But even when it's reached that level, the next question is, how does that study impact the way you do things in your workplace? The mandate of the Visions of Jewish Education project, which I have the privilege of directing, was to cultivate this kind of philosophical educational orientation to the practice of education in the workplace, among leaders, among institutions, among communities. The Mandel Leadership Institute is unique worldwide, not only in the Jewish or the Israeli world, because it works with a very particular conception of what it means to be an educational leader. That conception of leadership is one which brings, of course, the greatest management skills possible, but it works within a much broader picture of what education is about, what social leadership is about. It actually tries to help Jewish communities regenerate themselves, renew themselves, by giving their leaders a kind of safe place to rethink what they're all about, to look at alternative visions of what they could be, and to come back into the community with that larger prism and with all those same managerial skills, and then to bring that vision and to bring that energy into the community so that they move them forward, so that they contribute to their continuity. That's a very special kind of place. I did state-of-the-art research on educational leadership programs all over the world, and I found no program that articulated its identity, its definition in those terms. A lot of the work of the Mandel Leadership Institute began in work with leaders of Jewish communities around the world. But it grew way beyond there. That was only an entry point, and included, of course, not only Israeli education altogether, including the education of non-Jewish Israelis. It also stretched from a notion of education as being in educational institutions like schools or adult education programs or leadership or universities or training programs. It also included the civil service. It also included professions such as medicine. And people who came into the Mandel Leadership Institute started to come in from much broader areas where educational work is being done, but not limited to formally educating institutions. I think that we at the Mandel Leadership Institute and the Mandel Foundation have succeeded in introducing to Jewish and Israeli life an institution that will be here for a long time, that will serve a very important function on an ongoing basis. And that's no small accomplishment, because I remember in the early stages the challenges that were made to us. Why isn't this just a project? So you'll train a few leaders for a period of time, and then we'll go on to the next thing. And our answer was no. We have, it's very much like my own personal reason for coming to the Mandel world. We have universities who produce knowledge. We have practice institutions like the Ministry of Education. We're always going to need what we call then brokering institutions, institutions that can bring those two worlds together, and this is a function which we're going to serve over time. I think we've gotten there to the point that we're beginning to be recognized by Israel and by Jewish communities all over the world, that this is our role, that this is what we have to offer, and that this is what we've already begun to offer in the idea that our graduates have a special kind of characteristic that they bring to their work. This not only deep personal commitment, but this bigger picture of what they're doing. I think we've succeeded in establishing the basis for this to be an ongoing function of Jewish and Israeli society for decades and centuries to come. And in the big picture, I think it says the Jewish world and the Israeli world comes a place where educators and leaders from other communities, non-Jewish, say, how did you do this? You have a special thing. The way Jews and Israelis do education seems to have something special about it, something deep, and that they come to us and say, how do you do this? We want to learn this for our communities too. I've spoken so positively and in a celebrative way about that unique aspect of all Mandel work that bridges between practice and theory, theory and practice. As I said, it's what brought me here in the first place, and it's the field that I've worked on in the Educated Jew Project and in the Visions of Jewish Education Project. But I wouldn't want to steer you down the wrong path and to say that's an easy agenda to develop. In many ways, our desire to bring theory and practice together in the actual way that people work goes against the grain. It's much more comfortable to be only a theoretician. It's much more comfortable to ask the question as a practitioner, what works in reality, not what other alternatives could be. And often what we do brings our people to a place of having to stop in their tracks and rethink and work against their momentum and have to justify what they're doing in ways that are not so comfortable. Personally, this has been one of the great challenges of developing a Mandelian pedagogy in the Visions Project and at the Leadership Institute. And I think it's one of the deepest areas that we have to focus on and work on in the future. How do we make it possible for a person who has to make, according to one piece of research, a teacher in an hour lesson makes anywhere from 75 to 200 decisions? How do we help people be able to make bridges between theory and practice in an improvisational way? How do we give them enough room to practice this so that it doesn't become just a nice rhetoric, theory and practice, but actually to define that you could actually take any of our graduates and say to them at any point in their practice, hold it, stop, freeze. Why did you just decide what you decided? And they would give you an intelligent answer that would be grounded in their deeper theory about what the educated person or Israeli or Jew would be. I think this is one of our challenges for the future. This is where we have to be tough with ourselves in developing our pedagogies, developing our ideas, how to enable leaders to be able to get there.